There's a moment every woman dreads. That moment when something shifts. Not all at once, not with a loud explosion, but with a quiet, creeping realization. He's still there, but he's not there. At first, you brush it off. Maybe he's just busy. Maybe I'm overthinking it. You tell yourself it's nothing, that love doesn't just fade overnight. But deep down you feel it. The way his presence lingers less, the way his laughter sounds different, the way you no longer feel like the center of his world. Love does not end like a storm, loud and destructive. It fades like the last ember of a dying fire, like the tide pulling away from the shore. At first you don't even notice. The warmth is still there, the water still touches your feet. But then, one day, you reach out, and there's nothing left to hold on to. And so you try harder. You talk softer, love deeper, give more, because surely if you just do everything right, he will see your worth again. But let me ask you something. Since when did love become something you had to earn? Women always know before they know. The shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the little things, the pauses between words, the hesitation in his touch, the silence that suddenly feels heavier than before. And yet, instead of trusting what we feel, we tell ourselves stories to stay. We justify, we excuse, we ignore. But deep down, we know. And that knowing is what brings us here today. A man who truly values you will not make you question your place in his life. He will not make you compete for his attention. And he will never make you feel like you have to fight for what should already be yours. Because when a man starts to lose his love for you, he won't always say it. Instead, he will show you, through 8 undeniable signs. And once you see them, the only question is, will you keep waiting for him to come back, or will you finally choose yourself? You were not meant to spend your life chasing love that no longer chases you. A woman's worth is not measured by how hard she tries to be loved. It's measured by how quickly she walks away from anything that makes her question herself. Have you ever felt this shift in your relationship? The quiet pulling away, the unanswered questions, the slow unraveling of something that once felt unbreakable. If you have, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. I want to hear from you. 1. They withdraw their presence. There's a moment when you realize he's still there, but not really. At first, you try to ignore it. Maybe he's tired, maybe work is stressful, but then it happens again and again. The calls that used to come in the middle of the day stop. The texts that once had warmth now feel forced, short, and distant. He replies out of obligation, not excitement. The way he used to pull you close without thinking, the way his hand naturally found yours, now it's different. He still reaches for you, but the touch feels unfamiliar, like muscle memory rather than desire. You feel it before you can explain it. The air between you is not the same. At first you convince yourself it's nothing. Relationships go through phases. Maybe he's just overwhelmed. Maybe it's just a rough patch. But deep down, something in you knows. Because when love fades, it doesn't announce itself with a grand exit. It slips away in the quiet moments, in the way his presence lingers less, in the way his attention feels divided, in the way your conversations start feeling like small talk rather than deep connection. You sit beside him, yet somehow, you've never felt lonelier. I remember sitting across from someone I loved, waiting for him to look up from his phone, to ask me something, to engage. But his eyes stayed glued to the screen. His responses were short, distracted. I told myself it was nothing, but night after night, I felt the gap widening, the warmth fading. So I tried harder. I dressed up more, planned thoughtful surprises, listened more intently to his stories. I changed the way I spoke, softened my edges, did everything to make myself easier to love, easier to hold on to. But the more I tried, the less it seemed to matter. And that's when I realized, love is not something you have to convince someone to feel. When someone is truly present, you don't have to pull them back. Psychologists call this emotional disengagement. It's when someone consciously or unconsciously starts detaching from the relationship before they physically leave. It's subtle at first. They stop sharing little details about their day. They stop making future plans with you. They become less affectionate, not in an obvious way, but in a way that makes you second guess whether you're imagining things. You aren't. The human brain is wired to pick up on shifts in behavior, especially when it comes to emotional bonds. You feel the difference not because you're paranoid, but because something has changed. And yet, instead of trusting what we feel, we justify it. We make excuses. We hold on to the idea of what the relationship used to be, rather than accepting what it has become. We remember how deeply he once loved us, and we think that if we just do everything right, he'll love us like that again. But love, true love, doesn't need to be chased. The right person won't need convincing to stay. When someone begins to withdraw, our instinct is to close the gap, to fight against the distance. We want to fix it, to understand it, to do something. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Instead of overcompensating, match his energy. Instead of chasing, observe. Does he come back on his own, or does he drift further? A connection worth keeping does not require you to beg for someone's attention. If he wants to be there, he will be. If he doesn't, no amount of effort will change that. Imagine standing on the shore, watching the tide pull away. You could run after the water, trying to grasp what is already leaving. Or you could stand still, knowing that the ocean never truly disappears. It moves in cycles, and you are strong enough to weather the waves. Love should not feel like a constant fight to keep someone close. It should not feel like you are the only one holding on. If he steps back, let him. If he stops showing up, don't chase. The right love will not make you fight for its presence. The right person will not leave you wondering if you matter. The right relationship will not feel like a battle for someone's attention. And if you're feeling that battle now, it may be time to ask yourself, is this love, or is this just the fear of letting go? You are not losing him, he is choosing to step away. And if he is making that choice, then you have one too. You can choose to keep reaching for something that is slipping through your fingers, or you can choose to let it go and trust that what is meant for you will never have to be forced. The most powerful thing you can do when someone withdraws is to stand in your own worth and let them make their choice. Because your value does not decrease just because someone fails to see it. 2. They stop listening to you. The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand. We listen to reply. Stephen R. Covey. There was a time when he hung on to every word you said. You could talk for hours about the smallest details, what happened at work, a childhood memory, your dreams for the future. And he would listen with genuine interest. He asked questions, he remembered things, he made you feel heard, valued, important. But now, you find yourself repeating the same things over and over. You talk, but his mind is elsewhere. He nods, but his eyes are empty. It happens slowly at first. You brush it off. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe he's stressed. But then it becomes a pattern. You tell him about your bad day, and his response is nothing more than a distracted, "Oh, that sucks." You share something exciting, and he barely reacts. You ask for his thoughts on something important, and he gives you a generic answer, or worse, he says, "I don't know," and changes the subject. A friend of mine, let's call her Sarah, once told me about this shift in her own relationship. In the beginning, her boyfriend was engaged, present, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He remembered the little things, how she liked her coffee, the way she always twirled her ring when she was nervous, her favorite book from when she was a kid. But over time, something changed. She would talk, and he would zone out. She would ask a question, and he would give a half-hearted answer. She found herself having to repeat things constantly, only for him to say, "I forgot," or "I don't remember you telling me that." At first, she blamed herself. Maybe I'm not interesting enough. Maybe I talk too much. So she tried to be funnier, more engaging, more selective with what she shared. But it didn't matter. He wasn't listening, not because she was boring, but because he no longer cared enough to be fully present. This is one of the most painful ways someone withdraws from a relationship. It's not a physical absence, but an emotional one. He may still be sitting next to you, but he's no longer with you. A man who loves you wants to understand you. He listens not because he has to, but because he wants to. He remembers things about you, not just because they matter to you, but because you matter to him. So when he stops listening, when your words start feeling like background noise, it's not just forgetfulness, it's detachment. It's a slow, silent way of saying, I'm not as invested in this as I used to be. And here's the truth that's hard to accept. If someone values you, they won't need to be reminded to pay attention. If they care, They will listen, not because they have to, but because they want to. So what do you do when you realize he's stopped listening? First, stop trying to make him hear you. If you find yourself constantly repeating things, constantly fighting for his attention, step back. Pay attention to how much effort you are putting into being heard. If you have to fight to be listened to, that's already your answer. Second, start listening to yourself. Instead of focusing on his lack of attention, ask yourself, how does this make me feel? Do I feel valued? Do I feel respected? Do I feel like my voice matters? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to stop talking to someone who has stopped listening. Third, understand that love should not feel like a performance. You should not have to be more interesting, more engaging, more exciting, just to keep someone's attention. The right person will listen because they value you, not because you entertain them. Imagine you're telling someone a story, something that excites you, something that matters to you. Now imagine them looking at their phone, nodding absent-mindedly, clearly disengaged. How does that feel? Now imagine someone else, fully present, eyes locked on yours, asking questions, reacting, absorbing every word. That's the difference between someone who is there and someone who is gone, but hasn't left yet. Sarah, my friend, eventually made a choice. One day, after explaining something important for the third time and hearing yet another, "Oh, I forgot you told me that," she stopped. She realized she didn't want to be with someone who needed to be reminded to care. She deserved more than someone who only listened when it was convenient, and so do you. A man who stops listening has already started leaving. Not physically, not obviously, but emotionally. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to keep speaking into silence? Or do I want to be heard? The most powerful thing you can do when someone stops listening to you is to listen to yourself. To recognize that you don't need a man to validate your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. You don't need a passive witness to your life, you need an active participant. So if you're in this place right now, if you feel unheard, unseen, unimportant, know this: you don't have to stay there. You don't have to keep explaining yourself to someone who isn't paying attention. Because the right person, they won't make you fight for their ears, their mind, their heart. They'll listen. Because to them, you will never just be background noise. 3. They stop prioritizing you. At first, it's subtle. The small shifts that you barely notice until one day, they're impossible to ignore. He used to check in on you throughout the day, ask if you got home safe, remember that meeting you were nervous about. Now, hours pass without a word. You tell yourself he's just busy. But then you see him online, posting, replying to others, making time for everything, except you. You used to be his first choice. Now, you're an afterthought. People prioritize what they value. When something is important to us, we instinctively make room for it in our lives. Whether it's a job, a hobby, or a relationship, we find the time. Not because we have to, but because we want to. So when someone suddenly becomes too busy, when they start rescheduling, canceling, pushing you to the bottom of their list, it's not about time. It's about choice. A close friend of mine, let's call her Emily, went through this exact shift. In the beginning, her boyfriend made time for her no matter what. Even during his busiest days, he'd text her between meetings, call on his way home, plan dates ahead of time. But slowly things changed. The texts became fewer, the phone calls shorter, plans started depending on his schedule, and when they did happen, she felt more like an obligation than someone he was excited to see. The worst part? She didn't even realize how much things had shifted until she started hearing about his life from other people. His promotions, his new projects, even his weekend plans. She wasn't the first to know anymore. Sometimes, she found out through social media before he even mentioned it to her. When she confronted him, his response was predictable. "I've just been really busy." But the reality was, he wasn't too busy to go out with friends. He wasn't too busy to hit the gym, to scroll through his phone, to do all the other things that he chose to make time for. He was only too busy for her. It's a pattern many women find themselves in. At first, you justify it. You tell yourself it's temporary. You try harder. Be more patient, be more understanding. You work around his schedule, adapt to his needs. But here's the truth. When someone stops prioritizing you, it's not an accident. It's a decision. It's not about waiting for them to come back to the way they used to be. It's about realizing that they could prioritize you if they wanted to. They're just choosing not to. The way people treat us is a reflection of how much they value us. A man who respects and cares for you will make time for you, even in the smallest ways. He will check in, he will make plans, he will be present. Not because he has to, but because he wants to. The moment you start feeling like you're constantly chasing after their attention, that's your signal to stop. Studies have shown that when people lose emotional investment in a relationship, they subconsciously reduce the time and effort they put into it. It's not always intentional, but it's noticeable. The late-night conversations become routine check-ins. The quality time gets replaced with rushed interactions. The effort shifts from wanting to be with you to barely maintaining the relationship. But you were not meant to be someone's backup plan. You are not an option to be picked up when convenient and ignored when something more important comes along. The moment you feel like you're being squeezed into the leftovers of someone's schedule, it's time to step back and ask yourself, am I okay with this? Is this enough for me? Stoicism teaches us that we suffer the most when we try to hold on to something that is already leaving. The pain isn't just in their absence, it's in our resistance to accepting that absence. You can't force someone to value you. You can't demand a place in their life. You either exist in their world as a priority, or you don't. So what do you do when you realize you are no longer a priority? First, stop making excuses for them. If they have time for everything except you, the issue is not their schedule, it's their priorities. Second, match their energy. If they're pulling away, don't chase. If they're making minimal effort, don't overcompensate. Relationships should be mutual, not one-sided. Third, shift your focus back to yourself. Instead of pouring all your energy into trying to be someone's priority, ask yourself, am I prioritizing myself? Am I giving myself the same love and attention that I keep asking from them? Emily, my friend, finally made a choice. She stopped waiting for him to see her worth. She stopped begging for time that he wasn't willing to give. Instead, she put that energy back into herself. Her passions, her friends, her goals. And the moment she did that, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Because here's the truth. If you have to fight for a place in someone's life, you're in the wrong place. A man who truly values you will not make you question whether you matter to him. He will not put you on the sidelines while making time for everything else. If you are not a priority, then maybe, just maybe, he should stop being yours. 4. They stop keeping their promises. Have you ever noticed how, in the beginning, words feel like guarantees? When someone says they'll do something, you don't question it. You trust, you believe. But then, something shifts. Suddenly, the words that once carried weight start to feel empty. The promises that once reassured you start to mean nothing at all. I remember a time when I trusted his words completely. He used to tell me, I'll always be there for you. And I believed him. If he said he'd call, he called. If he said we'd make plans, we did. His words aligned with his actions, and that was what made me feel safe. But then, the small cracks started to show. It began with the little things, canceled dates, forgotten commitments, moments where he'd say, I'll make it up to you, but never did. At first I brushed it off. Everyone forgets things sometimes, but then it became a pattern. He'd promise to pick me up from work, and I'd end up waiting, watching my phone, knowing deep down that the call would never come. He'd say, I'll fix this, I'll do better, but nothing changed. And then there was the promise that made me realize everything had shifted. I never liked the smell of alcohol. It reminded me of things I wanted to forget, of nights spent around people who had lost control. When we first got together, he told me he understood. He said, I won't drink when I'm around you. I promise. And for a while, he didn't. He kept that promise, not because I demanded it, but because he chose to respect my feelings. Until one night, I walked into a room and the air was thick with the smell I knew too well. I looked at him. He saw the question in my eyes before I even spoke. It's not a big deal, he said, brushing past me. It was just one drink. But it wasn't just one drink, it was a broken promise. It was a shift in respect, in effort, in intention. It was a sign that the things that once mattered to him, that I once mattered to him, were no longer enough to guide his actions. People break promises for many reasons. Some do it because they no longer care enough to follow through. Others do it because they think the words alone are enough to keep you. They assume that as long as they keep saying the right things, you'll stay, even if they never follow through. But a promise without action is just noise. Research has shown that trust in relationships isn't just about big betrayals. It's about the small moments of consistency, the little ways we show up for each other, the quiet proof that we mean what we say. When someone stops keeping their promises, they aren't just forgetting commitments. They're showing you in real time that their words no longer hold meaning. So what do you do when someone stops keeping their promises? First, stop making excuses for them. If they used to follow through, but now they don't write it off as just a phase. Don't tell yourself, maybe I'm expecting too much. You're not expecting too much. You're expecting what was once given freely. Second, watch their patterns, not their apologies. If someone truly values you, they won't have to keep saying, I'll do better. They'll just do better. If you find yourself in a cycle of repeated disappointments, take a step back and ask, do their actions match their words? Or am I just holding on to the idea of who they used to be? Third, understand that your time is valuable. When you allow broken promises to pile up, you start teaching yourself that waiting is normal, that hoping for change is better than demanding respect. But you are not someone's backup plan. You are not an option to be considered only when it's convenient. The Stoics believe that suffering comes from attachment to things outside our control. You cannot control whether someone keeps their promises, but you can control how much you tolerate. You can decide that your time, your trust, and your love are too valuable to be wasted on someone who speaks but does not act. I learned this the hard way. The night he broke his promise, I didn't leave. I stayed. I justified. I convinced myself it was just one mistake. But then came the next one. And the next. And one day, I looked around and realized I was in a relationship with someone whose words meant nothing. That was the moment I made my own promise. To myself. I promised that I would no longer believe in words without proof. That I would no longer wait for someone to suddenly become the person they once were. That I would no longer settle for empty commitments from someone who had already shown me where I stood. And if you're in this place right now, if you feel like you're holding on to words that no longer mean anything, maybe it's time to make a promise to yourself too. Because the truth is, someone who truly cares about you won't make you question their commitment. You won't have to remind them to keep their word. You won't have to wonder if they mean what they say. They'll show you. Every day. In every little way. And if they don't, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop believing in their words and start believing in your own worth. 5. They make you feel like you have to try harder. At first, it felt effortless. The way he looked at you, the way he held your hand, the way he made you feel like you were enough, just as you were. There was no need to prove anything. No need to fight for his love, his attention, his time. He saw you. He chose you. And for a while, that was enough. But then, something changed. Suddenly, the things that once made him smile now seemed to annoy him. The way you talk, the way you dress, the way you express yourself, it's all under silent scrutiny. The compliments become criticisms. The ease becomes effort. The warmth turns into a test you're constantly failing. I know this feeling too well. I used to be confident, carefree, and full of life. I laughed loudly, wore what made me feel beautiful, spoke my mind without hesitation. But little by little, I started changing. It wasn't obvious at first. It never is. It starts with small things, a comment about how I should dress more elegantly, a suggestion that I should lose a little weight, a remark about how I should think before I speak. I took his words as guidance, not criticism. Maybe he's right, I told myself. Maybe if I just improve a little, things will be better. So I changed. I stopped wearing the clothes I loved because he said they didn't suit me. I adjusted my tone because he said I was too opinionated. I lost weight, not for myself, but because he once mentioned I'd look better a little thinner. And every time I made a change, I thought, this will be enough. This will make him happy again. But it was never enough. Each time I adjusted, he found something else that needed fixing. Every conversation became a test. Every disagreement became my fault. Whenever things felt off between us, he would say, you need to try harder. Or, "You just don't understand me." It was always on me. My job was to adapt, to mold myself into whatever version of me would make him stay. I didn't realize it then, but I was losing myself. When love becomes a performance, when every day feels like a test you have to pass, you are no longer in a relationship, you are in a constant state of proving your worth. And love was never meant to be earned. There's a psychological pattern known as intermittent reinforcement. It's when someone gives you just enough validation to keep you hooked, but not enough to make you feel secure. It's what makes a person keep trying harder, even when they're getting less in return. Because every now and then they throw you a moment of kindness, a glimpse of what the relationship used to be, and it makes you think, if I just hold on a little longer, if I just do a little more, things will go back to the way they were. But they never do. The Stoics believed that suffering comes from attachment to illusions, the illusion of control, the illusion that love can be forced, the illusion that if we try hard enough, we can change how someone feels. But the truth is, love is not something you win. It is not something you prove. It is either freely given or it is not love at all. So what happens when you find yourself in this place? When you realize you've been shrinking yourself just to fit into someone else's expectations? First, recognize that love should not feel like a competition. You should not feel like you are constantly being measured, evaluated, and corrected. If someone loves you, they will embrace who you are, not push you to become someone else. Second, pay attention to how often you feel like you're the problem. If every issue in the relationship is framed as something you need to fix, if every conflict ends with you being the one who has to adjust, step back and ask yourself, am I really the issue, or is this just manipulation? Third, remember who you were before this relationship. The version of you that laughed freely, spoke openly, existed without fear of judgment, that person is still there. You don't have to keep cutting pieces of yourself away to make someone else stay. I wish I could tell you there was a moment of realization, a single event that made me wake up. But the truth is, it was gradual. It was years of feeling like I was never quite right, like I was always one change away from being good enough. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. That's when I knew. I had spent so much time trying to be the woman he wanted, I had forgotten who I wanted to be. So I stopped. I stopped changing myself to meet his impossible standards. I stopped apologizing for things that didn't need to be apologized for. I stopped making myself smaller, just to fit into his world. And when I did that, when I started choosing myself, I realized something. The right love doesn't make you question your worth. The right person doesn't make you feel like you have to try harder just to be enough. The right relationship doesn't require you to change the core of who you are. If someone makes you feel like you constantly have to earn their love, then maybe, just maybe, they never truly deserved yours. 6. They start becoming someone else. There's something unsettling about watching someone you love transform into a stranger. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, the changes are subtle, small shifts in the way they speak, the way they carry themselves, the way they react to things that once mattered to both of you. But over time, you realize that the person you fell in love with no longer exists. They used to laugh with you over inside jokes, share their dreams with you, talk about the future as if you were always going to be a part of it. Now, their humor has changed, their interests have shifted, and conversations feel forced, as if you're speaking to someone who no longer speaks your language. At first, you try to adjust. Maybe they're just growing, evolving, becoming a better version of themselves. But deep down, you feel the difference. Their new habits, their new priorities, the way they now spend their time. It's not just growth, it's a departure. When someone is in love, they are often the best version of themselves with the person they love. They show up fully with kindness, patience, and consistency. But when that love begins to fade, something else happens. They start becoming someone else, not because they are improving, but because they are slowly detaching. Take the example of a couple who once bonded over shared passions. They used to spend their weekends exploring new places, cooking together, or watching their favorite shows side by side. Then, one day, one of them stops participating. The person who once loved weekend road trips now prefers to go out alone. The one who once enjoyed deep, late-night conversations now prefers silence. Or imagine someone who used to be thoughtful, remembering small details about their partner. How they take their coffee, their favorite flowers, the way they always get cold in the middle of the night. Then, suddenly, those details are forgotten. Not because they are incapable of remembering, but because they have stopped paying attention. Change is natural. People grow, interests evolve. But there's a difference between natural growth and intentional detachment. When someone stops prioritizing what once connected you, when they actively shift into a version of themselves that no longer includes you, that is not just personal growth, it is the beginning of an exit. The hardest part is realizing that no matter how much you try to hold on to the past, you cannot force someone to be the person they used to be. The Stoics teach us that suffering comes from resisting what is. When we refuse to accept reality, when we try to pull someone back into a version of themselves that they have already abandoned, we are only prolonging our own pain. So what do you do when you see them changing? First, stop trying to remind them of who they used to be. If they are intentionally becoming someone new, someone who no longer values what you once shared, it is not your job to bring them back. Second, accept that you cannot control someone else's journey. If their path is leading them away from you, trying to hold on will only drain you. The more you resist, the more you suffer. Third, focus on your own growth. If someone is changing in a way that excludes you, then maybe the real question is, why am I holding on to someone who is already letting go? There is a quote that says, if someone can walk away from you, let them walk. Because the person who truly values you will not force you to wonder if you instead of mourning the person they used to be, shift your attention back to yourself. Who are you becoming? Where is your journey taking you? Because the moment you stop chasing the past, you create space for something better. Something that aligns with the person you are meant to be. 7. They stop including you in their future plans. At one point, every conversation about the future included you. We should go there together one day. When we buy a house, let's have a big kitchen. I can't wait to travel the world with you. There was always a we, a together, a shared vision of what was to come. But then the language started to change. One day, you noticed the shift. I think I want to move to another city. I've been considering taking that job offer. I might go on a trip with some friends. The we quietly disappears, replaced by I. The plans that once felt like a promise now feel like a distant possibility. If they even include you at all. It's subtle at first. Maybe they don't bring up future plans as often. Maybe they hesitate when you talk about commitments, but soon it becomes clear. You are no longer part of their long-term picture. A woman once told me a story about her fiancé. They had been together for years, always talking about their future, getting married, buying a home, starting a family. She never doubted their path. Then one day, he came home and casually mentioned that he had applied for a job in another state. She was stunned. When did this happen? Why didn't he tell me? When she asked him, his response was simple. I didn't think it was important. But it was important, because what he really meant was, I didn't think it was important to include you. A person who loves you, who sees you as a part of their future, does not make major decisions without you. They do not move forward in life without considering where you fit in. If someone is truly committed to you, they will naturally factor you into their plans, not as an obligation, but as a choice. When a partner starts making plans alone, it is a warning sign that cannot be ignored. Psychological studies have shown that people who are emotionally invested in a relationship tend to plan for the future with their partner. It's a subconscious act, a way of reinforcing connection, a sign of commitment. When that stops happening, when future plans start sounding more like solo adventures, it's often because they are already emotionally detaching. And here's the truth that's hard to accept. If someone no longer sees you in their future, you should stop placing them in yours. It's tempting to hold on, to convince yourself that they're just going through a phase, that things will go back to the way they were. You might even start fighting for a place in their life that should have been yours without question. But the reality is, you should never have to force yourself into someone's future. A person who truly values you will make it clear that you belong there. So what should you do when you notice this shift? First, pay attention, but don't excuse it. If someone who once included you in everything is now making solo decisions, don't brush it off as nothing. This is not about paranoia, it's about recognizing patterns. Second, have the courage to acknowledge when you are no longer being considered. If you feel like you're the only one still thinking about a future together, ask yourself, am I building something alone? Third, understand that your future is just as valuable as theirs. You should never put your life on hold waiting for someone to decide if they want you in theirs. There is a quote that says, "Never beg for a seat at a table where you were once invited freely." If you feel like you're fighting to stay in someone's future, take a step back and ask yourself why. A partner who truly loves you will not leave you wondering where you stand. They will not leave you questioning whether you are part of their plans. And if you feel like you have to convince someone to include you, then maybe it's time to start making plans of your own, without them. 8. They make you feel like it's your fault. Have you ever found yourself apologizing for things that weren't your fault? Feeling like no matter what you do, it's never enough? Like somehow, every problem, every argument, every moment of distance is because of you? At first, it's subtle. He withdraws, and when you ask why, he sighs and says, "I don't know. I just feel different, and maybe it's because you've changed." You hear the words and suddenly, you start questioning yourself. Have I changed? Am I doing something wrong? Am I the reason he's pulling away? But then, it escalates. One day, he forgets an important date, and when you bring it up, he says, "Well, you've been so distant lately. I didn't think you cared." Another time, he raises his voice during an argument, and when you react, he says, "If you didn't push me so much, I wouldn't get this upset." It's a slow process, this shifting of blame. But before you realize it, you've become the one carrying all the weight of the relationship. When love fades, there are two kinds of people. Those who take responsibility for their feelings and communicate honestly, and those who look for someone to blame. The second type? They rewrite the story to make you the reason for their detachment. They convince you that if things feel wrong, it's because you're not enough, not loving enough, not understanding enough, not who you used to be. A common tactic in psychology known as gaslighting is when someone manipulates your perception of reality, making you doubt yourself. In relationships, this often looks like deflecting responsibility. Instead of admitting they are pulling away, they make you believe that you are the reason for the distance, minimizing their actions. If they hurt you, they dismiss your feelings. You're overreacting, reversing blame. If they do something wrong, they make it about what you did to cause their behavior. Let's take an example. Imagine a couple where things have been off for a while. The woman notices that her partner has been texting someone else more often, being secretive, and showing less affection. When she finally asks about it, his response isn't reassurance. Instead, he says, "If you weren't so insecure, you wouldn't be worried about this." Now, instead of addressing his actions, she's left questioning herself. Instead of acknowledging that his behavior has changed, he's made her feel guilty for even noticing. And this is how it works. The moment someone starts making you feel responsible for their actions, their feelings, or their choices, you have to step back and ask, am I really the problem? Or is this just a way for them to avoid accountability? A relationship should be a partnership. If there is a problem, it should be something you face together. But when one person starts shifting all the responsibility onto the other, it is no longer a relationship. It is emotional manipulation. The ancient Stoics believed that suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from how we interpret it. In other words, pain comes not from the breakup, but from blaming yourself for it. The moment you stop internalizing someone else's choices as your fault, you take your power back. So what should you do when you realize they are making you feel like you're the problem? First, separate facts from feelings. If something has changed in the relationship, look at their actions, not just their words. Are they blaming you for things outside your control? Are they avoiding responsibility? If the answer is yes, remind yourself that their behavior is not a reflection of your worth. Second, refuse to carry guilt that isn't yours. If someone is unhappy in the relationship, They have a choice. They can communicate, or they can leave. What they don't get to do is stay and make you feel like you are the reason for their unhappiness. Third, accept that you cannot fix what they are unwilling to face. No matter how much you try to prove yourself, no matter how much effort you put in, you cannot force someone to take responsibility for their own emotions. If someone truly values you, they will work with you, not against you. They will not rewrite history to make you the villain. They will not make you feel like love is something you have to earn. So if you're in this place right now, if you are constantly apologizing, constantly doubting yourself, constantly feeling like the reason everything is falling apart, please hear this. You are not responsible for someone else's inability to love you the way you deserve. You do not have to prove your worth to someone who has already decided not to see it. You do not have to hold a relationship together alone. And the moment you stop blaming yourself, the moment you let go of the weight that was never yours to carry, that's the moment you set yourself free. Love is not measured by how long someone stays, but by how they show up when they are with you. A person who truly values you will not make you question your place in their life. They will not make you chase their attention, beg for their time, or doubt your worth. When someone withdraws, when they stop listening, when they stop prioritizing you, when they make you feel like you have to try harder, you must remember this. It is not your job to convince them to stay. The greatest strength you can cultivate is the ability to recognize when something no longer serves you. The ability to step away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself more. The Stoics believed that peace comes from understanding what is within our control and what is not. You cannot control how someone loves you. You cannot control whether they see your worth, but you can control how much of yourself you give to someone who no longer values what you bring. So ask yourself, am I holding on to something that is already gone? If the answer is yes, then perhaps it's time to let go, to redirect your energy back to yourself, to rebuild your confidence, your purpose, your future, without waiting for permission. Your story does not end because someone chose to walk away. It simply begins again, with you. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced any of these signs? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.